Meanwhile, leaders around the world are planning their next moves. This after President Obama put temporary brakes on any American military action against Syria. In the wake of the president's address Tuesday, both supporters and critics wonder what's ahead for U.S. foreign policy. John Waggy has more.
In his White House address, the president tried to explain why the U.S. should act against Syria, even as the attack he was planning was temporarily halted by a move suggested off the cuff by his own Secretary of State.
If we fail to act, the Assad regime will see no reason to stop using chemical weapons. As the ban against these weapons erodes, other tyrants will have no reason to think twice about acquiring poison gas and using them. Over time, our troops would again face the prospect of chemical warfare on the battlefield. And it could be easier for terrorist organizations to obtain these weapons and to use them to attack civilians.
But the president knows he's in an uphill battle to move public opinion, with nearly two-thirds of the country opposed to U.S. military involvement.
I think President Obama presented his case, but he did not convince me.
To a person, every GI I meet, every parent I meet, not one of them wants to get involved in the Civil War. And it's not that we don't have sympathy, we just don't see a military or an American objective here.
Overseas, President Obama won applause from Iran's Ayatollah Khamenei, who said the U.S. decision not to bomb is a good one if it is serious. Israeli President Shimon Peres toured a factory near the Syrian border and questioned whether Syria would really give up its chemical weapons.
If they won't do it, I do believe the United States will keep her credibility and Syria will pay a price.
Despite all the drama of the past couple of weeks, not much has really changed. Iran's leaders are still pursuing nuclear weapons. Assad is still in charge and fighting Syria's civil war. Putin's influence in the Middle East continues to grow, while the U.S. is more reluctant than ever to exert its authority in the region. Meanwhile, Israel stands guard, ready to strike again if its own red lines are crossed. John Waggy, CBN News.
Dr. Kim Holmes is a distinguished fellow at the Heritage Foundation, and he joins us now with more on what the president had to say about the situation in Syria. Dr. Holmes, many said last night was the president's opportunity to persuade the American public to follow his plan of action for Syria. Was he successful?
I don't think so at all. The problem with the speech last night, it was just terribly muddled in its message. He spent many minutes talking about the need for making a strike on Syria, actually laying out the case in some detail about how chemical weapons were used and why it was in our national interest. And then after building up there, then he says, then we're going to let this diplomacy work itself out with this new Russian proposal, which if you look at it in detail, and which in fact Secretary of State John Kerry had said only the day before was completely unworkable. So in the end of the day, it just looked like he was trying to get away from having to force a decision in Congress to ask whether or not they would support the strike or not.
Well, what's at stake for the president and how he handles this situation?
Well, according to the polls, he's been significantly diminished by this. It's not every day that you see a foreign policy debacle or embarrassment affect a president's domestic agenda, but that appears to be the case here. But larger than that, and just in the politics of it, it's diminishing America's credibility and role in the world. The real winner of this whole episode is Vladimir Putin. Vladimir Putin had one goal, and that was to stop a U.S. strike against his ally, President Assad in Syria, and he achieved that. And now everyone around the world, including those in the region like Iran, is seeing that it's Vladimir Putin, not Barack Obama, that's calling the shots in the Middle East.
Well, if it does come down to it, does the president have enough votes for congressional approval for a strike? And if not, what then?
Frankly, it looks like nobody really wants to have this vote in Congress or the president, because the president doesn't want to be repudiated by the Congress, and many of his supporters in the Democratic Party don't want to be asked to support him, and many Republicans don't support the president. So this is like one of those things where everybody was looking, or the president was looking for an off-ramp, and that's why he grabbed onto this Russian proposal. The problem is, if you look at this proposal in detail, it's an off-ramp to nowhere because it's not going to work. You really cannot have a dismantling of chemical weapons by the international community, by the UN, in a war zone, and that's what this would amount to. And besides, the Russians said they would veto a resolution in the UN that would set up an inspection regime. So no matter which way you look at it, that proposal was unworkable. And we may be slow rolling the diplomacy on this. It may take a few days or weeks to see exactly how this will not work. But by then, the Congress will move on to other things, and perhaps the president will hope that the pressure on him to act will have diminished.
All right. Dr. Kim Holmes of the Heritage Foundation, thank you, sir, for your time today.
My pleasure.